As we gather today on this Feast of All Saints, we as a Catholic family come to honor those men and women who have served God so faithfully and have shown us the many diverse ways that we can live out our baptismal call. There's great diversity among the saints. Many people, I think, have sort of a false idea of what a saint is. For them, saints are people who have never committed a sin in all their lives. People who were always shining with virtue, strong-willed, humble, pure, who never lost patience, and who never thought of themselves, but always thought of God and others. Wow, I don't think that person exists. Because we have to realize the saints were human beings. And so there's a fallacy to that kind of thinking, because it implies that the saints were saints from the cradle onward. In other words, that the saints were born with a stamp on their head saying, "You are a saint." But the saints, as we know, were not born saints. They became saints. It was a process. They underwent a conversion, a change of heart, which resulted in a change of life. This challenge that they met in this change did not happen overnight, but it was the result of a long and painful struggle. They went from struggle to victory, back again to struggle, back to victory, but they were consistent, at least trying. They knew who they were. They knew they depended on the grace of God. What a marvelous variety of saints that we honor today. They are men and women. They're young and old. They come from all nations and all races. They speak many languages. They are teachers, preachers, artists, workers, parents, priests, religious, deacons, apostles, missionaries, musicians, and contemplative monks. And each one shared two characteristics: their love of God and their love of neighbor. Some of the saints that we honor today struggled on their path to sainthood. Think of good old St. Paul. St. Paul became this wonderful apostle to the Gentiles, but he didn't get there right away. He persecuted Christians. He arrested them, and we're told that he may have even participated in the execution of Christians. He fought a change in life until he was literally knocked off a horse, and he began to open his eyes to see the right way to walk was to follow Jesus. Or take good old St. Augustine, the patron of our diocese. St. Augustine at best could be described as a playboy. Lived a pretty wild life. And every time he was kind of pushed to kind of change, he'd say, "Not yet, God, not yet, I'm having too much fun." And his poor mother, Monica, St. Monica, stood behind, kept praying for him, kept praying that he would change, and he did. Finally came home. He finally was ready to follow the Lord, and he became such a great saint in the Middle Ages. Or take St. Catherine of Siena. I went to Europe several years ago, and I was able to, when I was pastor at St. Catherine's in Portage, and I went to Siena to see where she lived. And St. Catherine, if anything could describe her early life, she was a brat. She didn't want to follow anybody. She felt that she was in this intimate relationship with God, in that she belonged only to God, and so she hid in a closet most of her day to pray. And one day God said, And she had a vision. It says, Catherine, get out of the closet. Go out to the people. Work for the poor. Work with them. And Catherine changed. And she became this incredible woman who served the Lord so faithfully. Some of our saints were great teachers who helped us to understand better our faith. Marvelous St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Basil, St. Jerome, and St. Teresa of Avila. They gave us the foundation of our church, the academic foundation, to help us to understand the great mysteries. Some of our saints were dedicated to the poorest of the poor. Think of St. Martin de Porres, this wonderful man who himself black, who served the slaves that were being brought over from Africa. He served them very humbly. He was treated very poorly in his own monastery. He was discriminated against. But he had this deep, passionate love for the poor. St. Vincent de Paul, with another example of this. And of course, wonderful, beautiful Mother Teresa of Calcutta. What a wonderful woman she was, who gave so much working with the poorest of the poor in India, with the dying on the streets, bringing them home, cleaning their festering wounds. She founded a congregation. But Teresa suffered so much mentally. She was scrupulous. And she felt that she wasn't worthy of God's love. She felt she was the worst person in the world. She felt at times she couldn't talk to God because she wasn't worthy. And she was tormented. Many people don't know that. She was tormented all of her life struggling with this. But it didn't get in the way of her loving the poor, of caring for the poor. St. Francis of Assisi, another one who's worked so hard for the poor. Some were dedicated to the education of our youth. Famous St. John Bosco, who worked with the youth in the Industrial Revolution in Italy, and saw this fluctuation of people coming in from the countryside and all these kids with nothing to do, and their fathers trying to find, and parents trying to find work in the industrial area, and these kids walking the streets. And John Bosco gathered them together, set up places where they could be safe, where they could study, and he eventually spread his work to the missions all over the world with an emphasis on poor and abandoned youth. We can think of St. Ignatius Loyola, the wonderful work he did for education in our world with the universities that we have around us. There are many young saints. St. Dominic Savio, young boy of 15, who reached the goal of sainthood. He was a student of Don Bosco, St. John Bosco. Or our own Native American Indian, St. Kateri. So many examples of young people who came to the realization that they had something to give to the Lord. There are so many martyrs in our faith. The martyrs for peace and justice also, like our Oscar Romero, the Archbishop of San Salvador. Some lived in our own time. I like to say that I touched a saint, St. John Paul II. I was able to see him in Rome and to shake his hand, not knowing at the time he'd be a saint. I thought he was, but I didn't figure he'd be delayed, but they moved him up. We all witnessed the life of St. John the 23rd, Pope St. John the 23rd. And so we have recent saints that are around us. So the saints were people, I think, if we could really put it all together, who believed the good news of God's unconditional love. They knew they could be changed, that God would never give up on them, and who began to return his love. And by returning it, and they found that their lives changed, not overnight, but through a gradual process of growth, which didn't rule out that they sometimes failed again. And that's good news for us. We're on that journey. Probably a lot of good saints sitting right here. You won't get the attention, of Rome to be declared, but consistent followers of Jesus. Sometimes weak, sometimes strong, but always following the Lord. When you think of it today, we have a wonderful Catholic family. Our ancestors have done great things. We can feel proud of our past and of our ancestors in the faith. We are not a perfect church. Unfortunately, the last few years have proven that. But the saints teach us that God can transform us and make us saintly. We need only to look to the saints and know that that is so true.